Welcome to Michigan in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. It was 3 years ago this month that the COVID pandemic gripped the nation. Here in Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer imposed some of the nation's strictest regulations to curtail the spread of the virus, including dozens of executive orders that eventually were deemed unconstitutional by the Michigan Supreme Court. Last week, Whitmer appeared on a national broadcast with journalist Chris Wallace, where she acknowledged some of her edicts went too far. Joining me today to talk about these revelations is the Center Square's managing editor, Tom Gantert. 3 years after COVID struck Michigan, Governor Gretchen Whitmer now admits that many of her early lockdown rules, in retrospect, and I'm quoting here, don't make a lot of sense, end quote. So give us a little bit of background and some analysis here.
Well, let's remember we were getting a lot of contradictory information back then. If you might remember it, not all of it from Whitmer. It started out with the Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, who said stop in March 2nd, 2020, said stop buying masks. They're not effective. And then he had to retract that. But some of the things were CDC. Do you remember having to leave your groceries outdoors, being told to leave your groceries outdoors before you bring them in, walking one specific way in an aisle in Walmart? You know, you couldn't pass people. This gets into, now we're getting into rules that were by Whitmer. You remember when you were allowed to eat in a restaurant, you could only take your mask off to chew and drink, everything else. So let's go over some of the things that she was saying there. They had travel restrictions in Michigan, and part of the science that she was talking about in stories was she was talking about an actual quote of hers was, think of how many people touch a gas pump in 3 days. And she used that as a reason why. Less than a month later, US Today came out and said that you can get COVID from a gas pump. It's partly false, they said in their fact check. And they also said there was no evidence that people had ever gotten COVID from a gas pump. Then there was the things that at the time people were questioning, and that is, landscapers and lawnmowers couldn't do their job. Yet we had reports that some municipalities were still getting their lawn cuts, and you could see that their lawn had been cut during this ban on it. She banned golfing, but you could walk on golf courses. Then she allowed golfing, but not on golf carts. She banned motorized boats, but you could be in kayaks, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of stuff that at the time that people thought was pretty much out there. And looking back 3 years, it does seem surreal to a certain part, having lived through that. I saw people getting yelled at for not wearing masks. I saw, I was in Ann Arbor once, and a kid didn't have a mask, and he came in, and the young staff just shouted him out of the store before he could. All he wanted to know was where he could get a mask. There was a heightened level of, for lack of a better word, panic that these rules kind of enforced.
She banned stores larger than 50,000 square feet from selling paint and home improvement supplies, advertising for non-essential goods. Like you said, operating a motorboat could bring criminal charges, as could traveling to a secondary home, although her husband got caught a little bit of flack for trying to get his boat out of storage so they could get it out on the water in time for their daughter's high school graduation party. So there was the full weight of state government was brought to bear on Owasso barber Carl Mankey, for example, which is not too far from where I live. So I went over for some of the protests there to cover those as well. So it was a heady time. And I don't know whether you had the opportunity to watch the Chris Wallace interview or not, Tom. Please tell me that you did, because there were some claims that she made there where she contradicted what Wallace said when he was basically quoting CDC data, the Centers for Disease Control data, that said that for the per capita deaths from COVID here in Michigan were more than twice as high as they were in Florida. And she challenged those statistics, but she didn't bring up any counter evidence that would support her thesis.
Her administration, by the way, throughout the entire COVID, which we're still in, but in 2020 and 2021, were saying things in press conferences that were patently false. Things like rural hospitals are overflowing. Well, we knew that wasn't true because they posted data the hospital association was posting data, and you could see that wasn't happening. They weren't overflowing. They had posted, the director of health, the health director, was saying things about Ohio that was not accurate, that Ohio was worse than Michigan. And at the time, Ohio was clearly not worse than Michigan. And we did stories on that at the time too. So this isn't something new. They say a lot of things that the data doesn't support that's out there. It doesn't surprise me. And I guess the question is, in this age of the internet where all the information's at your fingertips, if you know where to look for it, you wonder why they do that, why they make statements that the data does not support.
Well, listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com, and for more stories by Tom Gantert. This is Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for The Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.